They minutely depicts the tribe's interactions and exchanges with nature in her writing. Mamang Dai writes her novel, in 19 stories divided into 4 sections. The sections are called A Diary of the World, Songs of the Rhapsodist, Daughters of the Village, and A Matter of Time. These stories contain within them a style of a oral narrative, uniquely translated in a writing script by her. They reveal the anxiety of the tribe on the face of a new developments. The people of the tribe lament shunning their ancient way of life and grudgingly adopt the change. These stories are replete with a sense of loss of a primordial way of life, values, and culture, which is so intrinsically connected with the surrounding nature. In this context, the legends of Pinsam attempts to discover the soul, then touch upon the very soul of the Adi tribe. In one of the preliminary pages, Dai states that in the language of the Adi, the word Pinsam means in between. And she goes on to add that it suggests the middle or middle ground, but it may also be interpreted as the hidden spaces of the heart where a secret garden grows. It is the small world where anything can happen and everything can be lived, where the narrow boat that we call life sails along somehow in calm or stormy weather, where the life of a man can be measured in the span of a song. Now we'll later see in this paper that these secret gardens in the heart of a Adi person is also in different way depicted in the cult of Shiva, the Banaspati. Now, both literally and figuratively, Pinsam is an intersection area of reality and myth, a myth where we can see the shamans or the priest calling their spirits. The reality and myth interchangeably used throughout the body of this writing. It becomes one. Hello?
Yes, Rajashri.
Am I audible, right?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So, this is a very suitable text for eco-critical reading, both technically and thematically. In the opening section, they describe the wilderness, the vast wilderness as the sleepy, peaceful, primitive adobe of the Adis, where the lush greenery traditionally offers them a color of escape and solitude. With the progress of the narrative tale, we see the non-human agencies sitting comfortably with the Adi people. It reminds us of a line from the Buell. Eco-criticism as a study of the relationship between literature and the environment conducted in a spirit of commitment to the environmental practices. This practice we will see in the writing of all other noticed literary figures prominently. The practice also was talked by the professor, the keynote speaker. The rich cultural heritage and pristine way of life, which was oblivious to the outside world, become exposed to the political development and economical greed, which failed to understand the filial bond of humans with nature. It reminds me of a certain excerpt from a Gabriel Garcia Marquez interview where he refuted the European journalist by saying that we, the people from South America, visits and visualizes the ghost in their lives, which may be termed as absurd in the worldview of the metropolitan core from Europe. In this writing, in this writing that the shaman or the priest calling spirits can be seen or translated as a tool of a hapless population, as a tool of the hapless population to to resist the incoming invasion of modernization and development. They have nothing to nothing in their hands, so they are calling all their gods and hosts for their protection. The visual imagery invoked in this novel is stunning. The literary imagery techniques issued to depict the peacefulness of life in nature with a lamenting tone. Let me demonstrate this by using the following excerpt. I quote, "The river cuts through our land as before in its long journey to the sea, inspiring the red flowers still blaze against our sky. But the old people now, the few of them alive, turn slowly in their sleep as the fires burn down to a heap of ash. In the middle of the night, a bird swoops low and calls out in a wild staccato note. The thatch rustles, the bamboo creaks, the darkness is full of breath and sighs. The rain comes gently, bathing the night." Such a poetical observation, even in a novel. I unquote. In this example, rivers, mountains, animals, forest, and rain are used metaphorically to describe the interconnectedness of the life world of the Adis with nature. The rain especially brings the vast wilderness into life. Therefore, it acts as a conduit for the world of living and the non-living. And the whole nature is personified as a divine life-giving and sustaining entity. This belief in animism made the whole of the Arunachal Pradesh is a biological hotspot. The terrain and the geographical expanse were also damaged by the invasion of the incoming tourists. Tourism caused a great damage to the ecology of the area. I quote from the novel, "The town was permanently awash in debris. Plastic floated across the hills, clung to river banks, perched on the trees, broken glass and discarded packaging scarred the bold slopes closest to the town. Workmen stuck on weight and chipped away at the mountainside. Their women stood by and looked askance with the dark, savage eyes." I unquote. A world with ecofeministic ideals is vividly seen through this clash between tradition and the modernity. It's as also mentioned by the madam, it's about the conflict and also resistance par excellence. Here I would do well to recall the theorization of natural contract as described by the Michael Serres. It is the natural contract written in 1990, influenced by the social contract of Rousseau. The natural contract deals with the philosophy and the history of law, and in particular with the question of who has the right to become a legal subject. Now, no, nature doesn't have the hand to sign any contract, but as it is clear in the writing, the nature is also vividly exhibited, made animated through the writings and the writing of the die, which is also showing a resisting culture of the tribal people there. In Bruno Latour's actor theory is also the case in point. He strived for a modern constitution where human and non-human existence would be respected and non-human ontology would be come into being. Actor theory, as we know, is a theoretical methodological approach to social theory where everything in the social and natural world exists in constantly shifting networks of relationship. It posits that nothing exists outside those relationships. Therefore, the particularly in his ontology of non-human other, Bruno Latour highlights the need for the non-humans to be included in the in the everyday decision and policy making, which is also case made strengthened by the Mama Dai's writing. Even if you look at the Indian tradition, we see the coexistence of ecology and humanity, just like it can be seen in the in the in the in the novel. In the Vedas, Lord Shiva is called as the Lord of the forest, Bonospati, Lord of the animals, Pashupati, and the Lord of the trees, Brikkhanampati. He is also described as a god of trees and god of the forest in 5 or 6 places of Veda. He is described as a big forest and his hair is green. A man who lives who lives within the nature and the nature lives within him. This is something we also see in the Dai's writing as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rajashri. That was really very detailed and too a lot many ideas and lot many uh, philosophical schools you touched upon. Really insightful. Thank you so much. So, a few questions. In the initial section, you mentioned Mamangai's gaze. Can you please elaborate on the idea of gaze that you have used in this context?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. Uh, as we've seen in the many cases, in the cases of the analysis, and even which also the madam referred in passing, that we need to intervene in the everyday degradation of the ecology. You see, a certain actionable practice of the theory or the praxis we require to to stop the gradual degradation and all. So in that context, the outsiders who are visiting the place for various other reasons, maybe for military activity or job or for tourism purpose, is leaving behind a certain trail of this very destruction that we are here opposing. So and the mainstream media are replete with the narrative of these outsider visitors prominently. But in the case of the Mama Andai, she is not she is she at times don many cap. She was a civil servant, journalist, and now a literary prominent figure of the region. So but her gauge organically developed from within the space. So it is very natural for her to to in a way to give voice or give, I would say, give rather certain transcript or a alphabet to the oral culture there, which is hitherto not received well by the outside people, as it is seen mainly these tribal people are primitive, the barbarics. So when the someone from the tribe itself emerged to write and voice their experiences, it becomes one with their own. Right? It is not refracted view, refracted gate. That is what I meant by the thing. I hope I answer your question. I answer your query, Sharani.
Right. Absolutely. I think it is something very much similar to the return of the gaze. Something from Baba. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay. So there's another important observation that you made is that how eco-criticism in India
Yeah.
and the role of Indian women
Yeah.
in that very movement.
Yeah.
And we all know about movements like the Chipko movement.
Yeah.
Women took lead there,
Yeah.
right? So but what would be your opinion about the lack of female involvement from cities? in this kind of movements versus these tribal or rural women. And I'm not talking about these certain activists, you see.
That's very interesting question, Sharanya. That's very interesting question, and I was just reminded by listening to a question. Let me just bring this to this forum as well. I mean, during the last 1 year of the Amphan cyclone has came to wreak havoc in West Bengal. So during that cyclone, let me, I don't know if it answers your question or not, but I am just tempted to inform you about this thing. During that cyclone, many people lost many things, but also the menstruating women also have their own kind of problem. Now, I know a certain group of Jadavpur University students. I can't help to mention it as being my alma mater. So that group of Jadavpur our that Jadavpur group, tried to send them, biodegradable sanitary pads. Okay, so yes, you are right in mentioning that there is a indifference or apathy from the city folks toward the need of the nature per se, but it is not, I think, specific to the women alone. It is all we who are a city dweller are also, equally responsible for this apathy, because we are in a way cut up from the nature itself. We don't see nature. We can't see or touch nature. Our sky is crisscrossed by the electric wires and cables or all short. We can't see, when we look up, we can't see a bird or a green leaves. So we are in a way rootless and cut up people, right? So that ego consciousness may have not developed within us, but yes, the pandemic has given us a great push towards those ecological understanding and thought process, thought development process. So these things are, I don't know if I have answered your question,
Right,
but
right, right. It is. You're absolutely correct, and it's almost like you're referring back to Vidya ma'am's comment on solastalgia and soliphilia, and how it is time for us to look back.
yeah.
Look into ourselves. Right. Okay. So, and another
Why not?
thing that.
Okay, okay, please
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So, okay, you may choose to answer in short. And how do you see eco criticism in the post humanist condition? It has not nothing to do with Mamanda. It's a very generic question.
Yeah, I can see that. No,
You may take
yeah.
it.
I do not have a very elaborate idea about it, but yes, in those post-human world you mentioned, I see people are engaging. It's completely my point of view. I may be academically and politically very much incorrect. By also, I am tempted to say this to you. I see, Sharanya, that people will, in a post-human society, or the Anthropocene the madam was referring to, I look at it very critically. I mean, people would indulge and engage in the lots of technical fetishes. Okay, and people may call a certain technological gadget, and may call a certain technical gadget as his or her pet. Okay, so I see a certain dystopia, looking forward to a certain post-human or a very technological future. I see all sort of this thing is coming to light, where people would take pleasure in having a companion in some robot or artificial intelligent thing or something like that. That's
Right,
all,
right.
Shraddha. Yeah.
Right, right. But there's another one. It's a very simple question. What is your opinion about shamanism in today's era?
Okay, okay. Your questions are all very interesting, but I hope and wish I am not, overstepping my this
Not
role
at
or
all,
as a
not at
host.
all, not at all. Please
Uh,
answer.
Again, I am going to be very politically incorrect. I think shamanism, or whatever name you might assign to it, shamanism, or the children dreaming or taking pleasure reading the fairy tales, are all those things are very much required in nowadays, because as you also mentioned about this post-humanism, post-truth era, where I see look at ourselves. We all are stuck where we are in for last 1 or 4 years. So uh, we are all in, we are surrounded by the technologies, everything else, but does it give us a certain growth as we understand in the nature? Can it give us that certain growth which is green, not gray like the technology? So I think this dreaming is the only way out. Daydreaming, you may call it, dreaming, believing in the ghost and other imaginary figures, perhaps. If you are a budding reader in the schools, or whatever stage in his or her life, if that person starts reading these sort of things, and then there is a secret space, will be created in the heart, where those as the Dai said, where I think the organically the certain imaginary greenness would
Yeah, the secret
grow.
garden grows.
Secret garden of the a garden of imaginary garden, green garden inside would grow, which can also heal us in this time, where he was talking about pandemic, and at the same time in the pandemic. So we are also mentally aggrieved in various for various reasons. So it can heal us from within, that believing in the shamans and all these things. That's all. Saradna.
Thank you so much, Rajashri. And that was really very insightful. Moving on to our last speaker for this panel. She is Itisha Patidar, and her topic is eco-critical concerns in Rishi Doma's Legends of the Lepchas, folk tales from Sikkim, an eco-critical reading of how the Lepchas got grey. Itisha is a final year BTech student from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Jodhpur. Her interest area is in the field of computer science, specifically AI. She has worked over projects which enhanced human computer interaction to make better experiences. Other than this, she has always been very interested in arts and literature, and she also likes to explore different traditions and cultures of different regions. Itisha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shalini. Could you please confirm, am I audible properly?
Yes, you are audible, there's a slight echo.
Okay, okay. Just a minute. Please give me. Is it fine now?
It's better. Yes.
So, good morning, everyone. I would now like to present my literary analysis paper on eco-critical concerns in Rishi Domar's Legends of the Lepchas, Folktales from Sikkim, and eco-critical reading of how the Lepchas got green. The Lepcha community of Sikkim has a pragmatic attitude towards the environment. They have an emotional tie with nature, and there's a perfect sync between these indigenous people and nature. Folklores have translated and transcribed their traditions, identities, socio-cultural practices, and beliefs. Yishe Doma documented these folktales in Legends of the Lepchas, Folktales from Sikkim. My paper attempts to understand one particular story titled How the Lepchas Got Green, and it examines the complete tale from through the lens of eco-criticism. So let me walk you through the story once. So this story shows how the Lepchas acquired the science of agriculture. The storyline revolves around the seven divine couples who live in a secret valley called Mai, and it is located behind mountain Kanchenjunga. These divine couples give the lepchas seeds of different varieties of grain to sow, and they also send white birds as messengers to announce the time of sowing and harvesting. The story also mentions that this myth is so deeply rooted that these migratory birds help the lepchas in determining their agricultural calendars even today. So the entire narration is replete with visual imagery showing harmony with nature. The later part of this presentation examines this eco-critical trope from within this text. But before that, let's discuss what actually eco-criticism and the eco-critical analysis is and how this text is one which is suitable for that. So I would like to discuss this with an example. For the lecture community, its guru or mother creator, or the notion of nature as a mother creator, has been intrinsic to their beliefs and traditions, and that were shared mainly in the form of oral narratives, and that existed much before the written literature. The involvement of environment in literature became mainstream in the last decade or two for this community. But the tribal physical environment and the lepchas still have faith in shamanism and nature worship. They depend on nature for innumerable reasons, and there exists a close relationship between human and nature. Rishi Roma in Legends of the Lepchas beautifully delineates their relationship with the surroundings, the mountains, the birds, the flora and fauna, the non-humans, being all parts of the nature. So this encourages a reader to engage in nature-oriented reading that lean towards eco-criticism, to understand the relationship of a literary text with the physical environment. Shelley Woodhill in the Eco-Criticism Reader, Landmarks in Literary Ecology, defines eco-criticism as an quote-unquote earth-centered approach to literary studies. Whereas Lindholt in an anthology defines the eco-critical perspective as the process of rediscovering human connections to the land. So this the folk tales of lecture community are also deeply connected with the environment and thus opening a new perspective of reading to illustrate the influence of nature over these writings. Let's now examine the eco-critical trope within this text, like story on the introduction of agriculture to the lectures, open with seven divine couples who are neither humans nor gods, presenting a non-human dimension and their intrinsic worth. This is evident from these lines, quote unquote. The seven divine couples, known to be the ancestors of the Lepchas, lived in seven beautiful houses in Mayu, a mythical village. Carl von Essen, in his book Eco-Mysticism, The Profound Experience of Nature as a Spiritual Guide, explores nature mysticism, where he describes that being in a state of expanded awareness, one can feel the interconnectedness of life. The interconnectedness of all life is where the mysticism comes in. So this story also opens a scope for eco-mysticism, the existence of these spiritual couples who were mystical beings and yet who also quote unquote ate and talked like ordinary people, ordinary beings. Even the oldest one of the seven divine couples who sheltered the shaman named Thekun Mansalam. So that by noon sets so, the nature here expresses a transforming reality that foregrounds the intermixing of ordinary human beings with these divine couples. Nonetheless, one should note That the captivating fact in this story is that there exists a unique niche where the supernatural and humans interact with each other and they coexist in peace. So for the lepchas, these seven couples, they show a great reverence to them. Another description of this sacred valley of Mail goes like, theirs was a paradise of warmth and love, a fairyland of never-ending joy, where crops grew 100 times bigger than elsewhere, and where the chirping of birds and the fragrance of flowers filled the air. The Doma in this state gives a unique presence to nature and its interplay of love, warmth, joy, and sustainability. It expresses an egalitarian view without discrimination and with a peaceful relationship between nature and humans. There's a perfect balance in the ecosystem with no food scarcity. A comparison could be drawn with the globalization of today that has led to food scarcity and that calls for a sustainable development. Even in today's era, the sense of sustainability and peaceful coexistence is ruptured. But the traditions of lepchas and their environmental friendly lifestyle with animistic belief may aid in a sustainable growth and conservation of their ecosystem. So, a description of one such animistic belief of the lepchas is given by Doma uh, in the lines like Kontin Konglu standing just behind, one year too, with its shape like the pricked up ears of an alert animal, guards against the faintest suspicious sound of unwelcome intruders trying to get to the secret village. So, this description points to the significance of such an eco-critical trope to their animism. The mountain here becomes an object of reverence, transmuting from thingness, which is associated just with a mere non-human thing, into a spiritual one, into a spiritual essence and significance. This could be related with the writings of Merrick Ladd, who describes one of the characteristics of animism as, quote unquote, the belief that all the phenomenal world is alive in the sense of being cultural artifacts and the natural entities, both biological and inert. The mountain Kongchen Konchlo is also personified, who acts as the guardian of mind. This narration about mountains in the story reflects the sacred association between the mighty Kongchen Konchlo and the Lepcha people who consider it as their deity. So the non-movement is not just portrayed as alive, but it is also filled with eloquence, and articulation. Just a second. The origin of the lepchas thus inherits a secret. Yeah, excuse me, guys. So, I was saying that this relationship of the mountains, that the non-human world, and the non-human world is not just portrayed as alive, but it is also filled with eloquence and articulation. The origin of the lepchas thus inherit a sacred animistic bond with the mountains, which had been in existence since time of the beginning, since time, beginning of the time. I'm sorry. So, and another worldview of the lepchas could be found in the lines. The Kagu announced to the people it was time to sow dryland paddy, and other birds announced it was time to harvest the crop. So, these lines introduces the readers to a unique bond between humans and an indispensable part of nature, that is birds. And they have been rendered with immense significance. It also reflects the angelic and divine roles played by the birds in the lives of the Lepchas, as they have culture practices. This narration just strengthens the bond and the conservation myths which are associated with it. So, the legends of lepchas syncs quite well with the eight principles of deep ecology, which are propounded in his book Basic Principles of Deep Ecology by Arnenius and George Sessions. According to Lewis, deep ecology is ecological wisdom by focusing on deep experience, deep questioning, and deep commitment. It emphasizes the interdependent value of human and non human life, as well as the importance of the ecosystem and natural processes. Neves and George Sessions summed up their understanding of deep ecology as eight principles of deep ecology, and one of these principles, the diversity of life forms on Earth, including forms of human culture, must have intrinsic worth. This principle is definitely touched in the tale, and as the divine couples, the mountains, the birds, the intrinsic worth here. Also, the Ruchi Chakravarti and Devarshi Chakravarti, in their article titled "The Representation of Ethnic Life, World of the Adis and Mamandais, The Legend of Tansa, and Eco-Critical Reading," points this out as quote unquote, the Adi view of forest, every life coming from nature. A similar kind of notion can be seen in Doma's book, where the Lepcha community also shares a sacred bond and their folktales present a fundamental idea of living in balance with the ecosystem. So I would now like to conclude my presentation by saying that these folktales reflect how the Lepchas have an ecological consciousness. Today's generation is struggling to balance economic development with, with natural resources conservation. As Western Steve Brown shows in their book Cultural and Spiritual Significance of Nature in Protected Areas, that spiritual and cultural bonds to nature are the strongest motivators for its conservation. This indeed is thoroughly praised by Doma's book. Her folktales kept nature in foreground and gave it human attributes, where even complex social issues are addressed by the elements of nature. So the lecture folktales open a substantial potential of nurturing and sharing nature in all dimensions of life. The lecture community serves as an ideal eco-critical model and emotional anchor not an irrational conviction towards nature. Thus, eco-criticism as an approach to interpret literary text assists a critique to appreciate the relationship between nature and human and not just social relationships amongst the people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Etisha. So we open the floor for discussion. Also, we can take in some questions related to Etisha's paper, and also if there is any general question and answer, comments on the presentations in the panel.
Yeah, Sharada, I have some question to Itisha. I'm just
I
pasting it
ask
on
him.
the comment
Oh,
box.
sure, sure, sure. Please do that. Okay, so there is one comment. This was a great presentation, Itisha. I liked how you cited a lot of text and used slides for better visibility and how you linked everything with each other very elegantly. Okay, so the one question for you is do you think philosophy of deep ecology could lead to sustainability, Itisha?
So, since we don't have much time, so I won't be going deeper into deep ecology principles. But the one which I mentioned in my presentation was the interconnectedness. The interconnectedness of the different forms of lifestyle. So, going with that principle, I think definitely the principles of deep ecology could help us in achieving sustainability. Ecosystems require every member to function, and there we don't need an interference or like which is uh, which goes at a negative side of some other, like a part of an ecosystem. So in this infinite relationship, all things help to contribute to the richness and diversity in life. So until and unless we understand this interconnectedness of different parts of nature, and we uh, start living with it, and we need to value the richness and diversity of life forms in and of themselves, and uh, because at the end we all humans also rely on them. So this explains that ecosystems are self-regulating and self-maintaining also because of the biodiversity and interdependence. So the principles of deep ecology, according to me, would definitely help in achieving sustainability.
Right, right. Okay. There's some more actually. So you mentioned about the conservation of kaku. Is it still practiced?
Yeah, definitely, it is still practiced, and uh, I don't remember the exact article, but yeah, in one of the article I also read that the Sikkim government has many rules and regulations for the preservation of kaku, which is now termed as cuckoos, and 52 or 52 of species of cuckoos migrate to Sikkim every year. So they pay special attention to their nesting and not disturbing their habitats.
Right. Okay. And I don't think there is anything else. If there is any question from on the on the overall presentations from this panel, uh, I don't think there is
Sharanya,
any.
I think we need to move to the next session. Uh,
Exactly. Yes.
yeah, we are
We
running
are
short of
already
time.
lagging
Yeah,
behind.
yeah, we
Yes.
are. Yeah,
Okay.
there were
So
some
I thank
technical glitches.
everyone, and I leave it to Mom to take over from here. And thank you once again to all the presenters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sharanya, for that. Very interesting panel on ecology. So now, sorry, I'm not giving you any breather or a break because we have sort of, overshoot the time allotted for the previous in this session. So the next uh, panel is on orality. And before we begin this second panel, I will sort of talk a little bit about orality. uh, you can say a note on orality. So orality is not a single homogeneous term for scholars of and from this region. And Temsula Au, more in more detail, these positions will be explained and explored in more detail, from the presenters of this particular session. But so I'll begin with some of the uh, positions on this keyword orality. So Temsula Au, she fuses the oral and the written when she articulates her ideas on writing orality. And in an interview, she expresses the belief that, I quote, poems are she's sort of making a connection between poems and songs. So poems are nothing but the inner songs that are born within a poet's mind, unquote. And in fact, in her own in our language, quote unquote, oral poetry is ken, which means songs. So, in fact, Ao is citing scholars from, Mohammed to Mahapatra, Sita Khan Mahapatra, and she attempts to, distinguish oral tradition with orality, just like in the previous session we had this distinction between ecology and, ecologist and an environmentalism, those two key terms. We have, this distinction on oral tradition with orality. So while oral tradition, quoting some of these scholars from N. Scott Momaday and Sitakant Mahapatra, uh, according to Au, pertains to the relationship between the written and the oral, and both of which employs language as quote means of expression, and orality merely has to do with the form, seems to just differentiate the form. And then we have, Tilotama Mishra, who observes that, for science, Parsi community, I'm quoting again, the written is not considered as creditable as the spoken. And in fact, the spoken word is credited with more authority than the written. And Mamangda, in an interview with Jaidev Sarangi, considers oral tradition as quote unquote a way of life that gives her a sense of identity. And her response to these myths and stories, which constitutes oral tradition, is similar to as if she's on a quest, and it is a worldview that she is still exploring. But for me, maybe sometimes parallel, sometimes in support. Orality is political. It is a conscious choice to be political. Its untangible form resists containment, just as this region resists homogenization, and it is similar to the invisible air that surrounds us and sustains us. It is everywhere, and it is free, and it remains free. uh, yeah, of course, yeah. Fun not intended. The economical, and in the sense of the economical, and in the sense of political desires or aspirations. So with this not, I have to admit that my students in this panel would be in a better position to reflect on orality, and so without wasting any time, we start this panel. The second panel is going to be chaired by Supreet, and Supreet is a doctoral student from IDRP, Digital Humanities, and her research area is digital heritage and culture. So, Supreet, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very good afternoon to all of you. I, Supreet, will chair the session on orality. So before we move ahead, I'll discuss the rules here. So we'll be having 5 presenters, and after each presentation, we'll be having Q&A round. I wish all the best to all the presenters. And now I'll call our first presenter, Yash Kumar Singhal. He's a first-year MTech student from Department of CS and Engineering at IIT Jodhpur. He's interested in cognitive science and AI. Apart from that, he's also interested in film studies and the art of narration. And today he will present the paper on orality in Rajendra Bhandari. So over to you, Yash.
Thank you, Supreet, for introducing me. Once again, I will present my screen current now. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Oh, okay. Good morning. So my name is Yash Kumar Singhal, and I'm a MTech student from the first year at IIT Jodhpur. And I'm going to present here on the Orality and Ecology webinar on India's Northeast. And the paper that I would be introducing would be Orality in Rajendra Bhandari. So the present paper, the Orality in Rajendra Bhandari, attempts to scrutinize the literature from the India's Northeast, particularly its oral aspect and the significance of doing so by analyzing a poem by the Nepali poet from Sikkim, Rajendra Bhandari. The poem that I shall use for the analysis is an incomplete folk tune, which invokes a powerful image of an incomplete Nepali folk tune that drifts along the frauds of the river Tista. So, little about Rajendra Bhandari. Rajendra Bhandari is one of the most prolific poets who resides at the foothills of the Sikkim and has been writing poems on Nepal for the last 4 to 5 decades. His writings often symbolizes the slice of life, the inner turmoil the characters go through, the human need to feel accepted, to feel loved, and to search for his identity in the vast world. Bhandari's poetry often veers between satire at one end to feelings of nostalgia and thoughts of human beings at the other end. Hence, it is fair to say that his poetry often symbolizes the study of the human character. his or her place in the society, and the relationship between the human and the nature as a whole. Banjari's poetry also expresses the current political and social upheavals in Sikkim, arising out of globalization, and is not afraid to comment on the issues of losing one identity or the widening gap between the have and the have-nots. His poetry often encompasses the viewpoints of his childhood and upbringing, as he is part of a traditional Brahmin family, as he tries to come to terms with the change in his and the society, and often compares or rationalizes it. According to the critics, Banjari's poetry is greatly influenced by the Nepali folk literature, the history and the life of the Nepali society, particularly situated in the hills of the Darjeeling and the Sikkim region. His poetry often stresses on the myths of the people in their respective place and hence their role in the Sikkim Nepali society. Oral tradition is often passed from generation to generation, usually in the form of songs, rhymes, and lullabies, signifying the day-to-day activities of the people. He has a deep interest in the Nepali folk literature and easily delves into the Nepali folk songs, belief, traditions, and culture, which is evident from his own doctoral thesis done on Nepali literature. Banjari's poetry often goes into the narration of a simplistic life. The narration is also inspired by the oral folk tales, folklores, myths, and stories of the Nepali people. His poem, An Incomplete Folk Tune, demonstrate this. It begins with the title itself. Here, the term folk tune contains within it another word, the folk, that the latter has its roots in the Nepali oral tradition. In this poem, the Banjari infuses a certain kind of nostalgia for the land and the dream for the future, as the author attempts to feel the vastness and the grandeur of the surroundings he is currently experiencing. The orality of this poem is most evident when there is a reference to a certain incomplete folk tune. Chhati bhara bokera pirai, per jade ucha hai tista koi terai ter. In this poem, it also symbolizes the importance of the oral. The poem participates as well as invokes a certain kind of oral tradition when it incorporates themes from the oral tradition such as folklores through this oral folk tune, a tune that accompanies an orally sung song. An incomplete folk tune for Banjari then becomes a poem about the Nepali oral culture with its invocation of a folk tune. A tune is unusually heard in the sense that it pertains to the oral. Yet in this poem, it is seen drifting along with the froth of River Teesta. By using the literal device of synesthesia, Banjari transfers an oral experience to a visual image. This synesthetic experience merges the oral tune of folk song with the visual as images seen in the poem. Thank you, and hope everyone had liked the everyone liked my presentation.
Thank you, Yash, for such a wonderful presentation. Now we'll take the questions. So we have a few questions for you.
Yes.
So, Yash, could you elaborate a little more on how Bhandari uses the literary device of synthesia?
The synesthesia, it means in the synesthesia and context mean the usage of all their organs to describe something, and then the poetry, the incomplete folk tune, is a beautiful example of that. For example, there's a phrase which says that a northern breeze flirts across the nose. So he's kind of using the senses as a nose as an analogy to describe how the northern breeze is flirting and how the air is quite pleasant to begin with. And this is also evident from the other passages of the poem itself, in which he uses a sentence to basically describe the grandeur of the place that he is currently experiences, the vast mountains, the riverland, and he's also able to hear some kind of a folk tune. And he says that he can also hear a certain kind of folk tune while he's experiencing that. So he heavily uses the synesthesia, literally and literally here to describe his feeling in the poem.
Okay, thank you, Yash. Now we have another question for you. So when passed on from generation to generation, folk songs and folklores get twisted and sometimes lose their true essence entirely. So what is Bhandari's take on this?
That is a good question. Banjaris acknowledges that in that one of his interviews, there are mostly the folk songs and the folklores usually get dumbed down upon as the progress goes by. But he also acknowledges there are certain kind of some folk songs and the folk tunes, some specific folklores which do not get altered much, and he is happy to see that how the presence of these folk tones and fusion has only been increasing in the future. So it is important to realize that not all folk songs and folklores gets important, but there are certain folk songs and the folklores which are very much prevalent, which are very much important in the society, which doesn't really get dumped down upon, and and it is usually passed on generation to generation. So that's my answer of the question.
Okay, Yash, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all. And now we'll call our next presenter. So our next presenter is Sharnya Ghosh. He's a doctoral student from the IDRP, Digital Humanities at IIT Jodhpur. Her research is on digital pedagogy, literature pedagogy, and educational technology. And today she will present a paper on orality, memory, and the meaning-making process. So over to you, Sharanya.
So, Preet, can you please confirm whether I'm audible or not?
Yes, you're audible.
I hope it is visible to my screen, that is. So thank you, Supreet, and thank you, Dr. Thoudon, for giving me the opportunity. My topic today is orality, memory, and the meaning-making process in Mamang Dai's The Legends of Pensam. And these are some of the key areas or key issues that I will be discussing through this paper. Mamang Dai, in a preface to her work, The Legends of Pensam, informs her readers that Pensam is the world or space in between, the middle ground, something very akin to Tolkien's Middle Earth, where everything and anything is possible. Tolkien's notion of Middle Earth is at once magical and real, inhabited by 7 different species, including human, elves, hobbits, sorcerers, and others. Likewise, Pensam is a place or space where humans are not alone and are often visited by spirits and mythological creatures, but through their reveries. Dai refrains from divulging any further clues as to what this middle space entails, save that the readers are left to believe that this space is something of a meeting point of 2 worlds, a misty and mystical zone, where time collapses into the sea of eternity and nothing but a fluid-like continuum exists, represented through a non-linear temporality that connects people from different generations in the same thread of existence. The narrative embodies this continuity and uncertainty through a very intricately woven storyline that is not narrated by one narrating persona. It is an amalgamation of many voices where the main narratorial voice drowns into a piece of polyphonic music. To contrive such a detailed narrative, Dai has taken resort to what she grew up with, the oral legends of the Adi community, and molded her characters and their stories into a form that suits the age-old sagas. Her style belongs to Pensam, evocative of its mythical, historical qualities. She plays on the collective memory of her people and her memory of a life lived in complete bliss, far from the madding crowd of civilization, as she goes on adding one story after another within the frame narrative. The poetic cadence of a language, and this is very important because Dai has chosen not to use her mother tongue, which is really very important to further discussions, acts as the perfect medium of communicating these stories to the readers. Now, whether her use of English is a mere sign of elitism or a kind of means of reaching out to a greater audience, it's kind of a contested issue and maybe not pertinent to this particular paper, or maybe not possible within the span of this presentation. But the meaning making process that sort of develops through this kind of a craftsmanship is born out of the interplay between the linguistic signifiers and the oral tradition on which they are based. Alistair Thompson, who lists 4 distinct paradigmatic transformations of oral history in its theory and practice, writes that oral history serves as an essential source of history from below. By assigning historical value to the oral tradition, Thompson, like many other scholars, frees it from the smears of incredulity. Furthermore, what is history from below but the stories of people and their lives, as those have been experienced by these common folk and narrated in their own voice? The reliability of the oral history or oral memory is fraught with the possibility of biases, yet it is their subjectivity that provides clues about the relationships between past and present, between memory and personal identity, and between individual and collective memory. It is at this confluence of the individual and collective memory that Pensum thrives. And thus the legends is born. Being a representative writer of a particular type of post-colonial predicament further complicates this matter. The small voices of history that she has attempted to narrate are evocative of a very specific type of historical and political identity that is defined by its marginal existence on one hand and the country's own colonial past on the other. While by the look of it, the book is a novel, it is actually a collection of short stories involving characters from the past and present whose actions fill the pages and whose existence in the greater matrix of the Adi life becomes one with the stars, whose names we made up according to their configurations. The 4 sections of the narrative, A Diary of the World, Songs of the Rhapsodists, Daughters of the Village, and A Matter of Time, seem organically connected as characters, living or dead, come and go across various tales. It opens with the boy who fell from the sky, Hoxo, and then the readers are eventually introduced to 2 European friends of the narrator, some British officers, and 3 generations of Adi women and men, like the beautiful Nenem and worldly Rakut, whose lives these tales encompass. The main narrator of the story, who resembles Dai's personality but is not probably her, takes us on a trip in and around these Adi villages where nature and humans live in an ever symbiotic relationship, existing in a space where the real and the fantastical collapse. What Dai has done in this thickly woven narrative is she has merged the oral with the written in the same way as she has merged the lives of these tribal folks from different generations. One cannot help but feel awed at the hypnotic experience that these legends create. Their very arrangement is such that the reader gets to swim through a sea of memories, both individual and collective, and realizes how none of these is disjointed per se. Rather, a powerful commonality of existence and experience define them. People may come from different generations. Their very roots are firmly grounded in these Emerald Mountains. But Dai, in the essay Oral Narratives and Myth, writes, the question of direction and destiny has become one of great complexity and soul-searching. And the question is, where do we begin? What is the most important thing to start with? Perhaps in this, myth and memory have their role too. How do we identify ourselves as members of a community belonging to a particular place with a particular history? Some of the signs for this lie with our stories. We are here today as members of a community with a particular set of beliefs by an act of faith, because we believed in the word as composed in our myths and legends. It is here that we may find that peculiar, indefinable something by which we recognize each other and make others see us as a group, a society, a people of a particular community. This sense of destiny, which is at once personal and shared, drives the very narrative of the legends. Dai's deft juggling of the oral form with the written brings us to an interesting question raised by post-structuralists like Barth about authorship, and the very process of meaning making. In his SZ 1970, Roland Barthes talks about readerly and writerly texts. The former, that is, readerly texts, are consumed, whereas the latter is produced. The author, in the latter case, is relegated to the position of a writer, whose interference otherwise in the meaning-making process of the text is minimal. But can the same argument be used in the case of the legends too? For post-structuralists like Barth, the author's subjectivity and its eventual obliteration is the outcome of a very Western postmodern system of knowledge. The same may not be proclaimed about Dai's authorship too. Her tribal post-colonial identity is at the very heart of her narratives, which problematizes the place of the legends as a writerly text. Yet one must commend her craftsmanship, through which she has been able to distance herself from the narrative process, and her readers are left to interpret and understand the nuances of the text. The very scriptability of this text lies in its interplay of orality and memory, both of which are unreliable in terms of their consistency or the lack of it. What is then left for the author to do? Dai addresses this dilemma by keeping her narrative true to its origins. It is free-flowing and honest, and she uses a frame narrative with flashbacks and visions as literary devices, to kind of conjure up this world of the legends of Pensar. Her carefully placed short stories are actually part of a greater collective narrative, of which she too is a necessary part. As a result, a reader is free to open the book at any point and move forward or backwards to collect their cues. The different parts of the book are organically conjoined and independently meaningful at the same time. One goes through various periods of time, which is not linear in this part of the world, and glides through the spatial and human dimensions without inhibitions. As a result, the reader encounters a view of time that is beyond human comprehension, a time of myths and lores of mythical superhuman beings that surrounds the existence of these people till date and is, often manifested through various natural phenomena or visions. So there is the remote past, which is set in the pre-independence era. You have the recent past set in the post-independence era, and you have the present, in which basically the frame narrative is set, where the central characters of the stories dwell. A hint of the future is given in the final chapter, titled A Matter of Time, that is somewhat grey or possibly dark, and more rooted in the changing scenarios resulting from modernization or globalization. However, the linear understanding might fail as reader realizes that these characters, the narrator and the author herself, are never separated from this collective past that is both mythical, natural, and historical, even in their mundane existence. The outcome is a collection of narratives free of authorial intentions or interference and absolutely open to readers' responses. The short stories are left open-ended, as is the frame narrative. Readers are left to conjectures about the different eventualities emanating from these different narratives. Dai has successfully captured the dynamic, non-linear, digressive nature of the oral form by adeptly handling the memory quotient that drives these stories. She has delineated characters through a few master strokes, while drawing parallels between generations, ethnicities, spaces, that is modern and rustic, territories, that is tribal and civilized, as time. Au, another writer from India's Northeast, quotes N. Scott Momaday in her essay titled Writing Orality as saying that the oral tradition implies a separate and distinct order of reality, which is not concerned with an accurate representation of actuality, but with the realization of the imaginative experience. The ambiguity of the oral form might render it the status of inconstancy. Yet, when one attempts to write it down, it transforms the oral tradition through recollection, inclusion, inversion, and reinterpretation. She also talks about the local and universal literatures, where the fictitious settings of the local get transformed into some very relatable universal contexts. In this way, the meaning-making process also becomes an act of vindication of the very act of writing. While writing, by nature, threatens to terminate the very continuity of orality, its departures and digressions, it is the readers and their acts of meaning-making that renders orality sustenance and perpetuity. By writing the oral tradition of the Adis, Mamandai has attempted to produce a literary experience that is no longer limited to any particular geographical location. Rather, attains a universal significance as our readers begin to identify and empathize with the predicament of the people. In this manner, Dai takes on the role of a shaman, a rhapsodist, narrating the ageless, timeless stories of her people to the readers of the world, while also using a global language. Athiko Kaisi opines that cultural memory is a form of collective memory, in the sense that it is shared by a number of people, and that it conveys to these people a collective that is cultural identity. This cultural memory gets reflected through the collective memory of the generations old oral narratives that Dai presents to us through her work. So, does the legends also signify the death of the author and the birth of the reader? The legends of Pensam lets its reader take in all the pleasures of the text, making them not only sites of language's empire, but also connect the text with systems of meaning. That is not limited by the author's intentions. At the same time, Dai's own tribal post-colonial identity renders the narrative a depth of perception and truthfulness that helps create an alternative reading of history. In this way, she has given us a minutely woven tapestry of smaller tales and histories that is born out of the many voices from the oral and mnemonic traditions of the Adis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharnya, for such a wonderful presentation. It was nice hearing you. Now, let us move to some questions here.
Thank you, Sharanya, for your wonderful presentation. Now, may I just ask you some questions?
Please, of course.
There has been some, some comments came in. Let me just read it out then first. Thought-provoking comparison with births. Okay, and another, yeah. Now the question is, how do you look at the possibility in the text where post-colonial realities, intertwined with the identity formation of people in Pensam? How do you look at that?
Well, that's actually interesting, and as I said, it was really very difficult because I started off with Barth's ideas about authors and authorship, and and also the very notion of orality, history. But most of these thoughts that were used initially were propagated by Western, thinkers or philosophers or historians. So, but then when we shift our focus, we come to, and we consider the post-colonial identity, especially in a place like Pensar. Dai has actually given us this very unique perception, because you see, the writer herself, she has risen to a particular status, I would say, through her westernized education, and her use of the very language, English, is itself, a very interesting kind of a medium, I would say. And then, but she talks about identities. She talks about, her narrator is constantly, torn between, these two emotions. There is this immense love and yearning to go back to her roots, but at the same time, she is also very much aware of what needs to be done. In case of Nenem, who comes back to her roots, in spite of the well, opportunity is a bad word, but then let's put it in quotes and say that, in spite of the opportunity that she got to go out of her predicament, go out of this existence and live a better life perhaps, but she did not. She comes back, and and time and again, we get to see the same thing. It is only in the last part of the novel, A Matter of Time, that we see that there is a kind of a, what should I say, there is a kind of a gloominess of sorts. What, however, is interesting is, even in the middle of so much of gloom, there is jubilation. And these people, they don't want to come out of that jubilation, that sense of exhilaration. And that is the post-colonial and tribal identity, the marginalized identity that, Dai perhaps is trying to evoke here. I don't know whether I have answered your question. Yeah.
Nicely. Now, however, you have spoken in great details about the non-linear temporality and all that in the writing. But still, I would like to know a little bit more about, the literary time, or if I may say so, a writerly time that is used in here, and possible response, perhaps, of the reader in terms of memory making process of an ecologically fragile nation.
I'd like to clarify, memory making or meaning making. Did you mean memory?
Memory. Yeah.
Memory. Okay. All right. So that's a very complicated question. Let me first give it a thought.
Your comment on that, actually, it's not a question. I also went through the same text. I am just would like to see your comment, observation on that. It's not a question per se. It's for discussion purpose. Yeah.
Actually, I mean, let us see it this way. I mean, let us see it as a reader, and you may simply agree with what I say or disagree with me. As a reader, when I read Dai, and interestingly, that was the first text that I read, in this particular course. When I read her, the first thing about memory, and identity that struck me was how much of it is missing from what is known as the collective memory of this nation. That how little do we know about this, this particular space, geographical space. I'm not even including the political, the historical, the economic, the social aspects into it. I'm just talking about the geographical space. And I do remember what our instructor said after our presentations initially, that we only focused on these very the beauty of the place, tourism and things like that. We don't really know much about it, about the people there. And it is true, this So basically, when we say memory making process, whose memory are we talking about? Are we talking about the memory of these people, the people about whom Dai is writing, or is it the memory of the nation? Because clearly there isn't much of it in the collective memory. So that is a kind of a, what should I say, problem area, I would say, in the text. Yeah.
And actually, Sharana, I mean that your thought on this remind me something that do us who look at it academically, do we really think it is a could be a historical material for analysis and history making process, that the Ural the very Ural essence of this zone. I mean, it's a little problematic. Even from your this observation, it emerged that I mean, it's little problematic to consider Ural things, Ural myths, etc., for a concrete history making. But then again, this bottom-up stories make for the veritable account for the past, which was.
Yes, that's true. I mean, and that is there's this quotation that I pointed out. I don't remember, whether you remember it or not. Where Ao writes, no, not really Ao. Mohammadi writes that he talks about this imaginative experience. So he mentions very clearly that you see, orality may not be historically correct. So if you're looking for accurate or accuracy through orality, you are looking at it from a wrong angle already, right?
Absolutely.
But orality gives us what is like that imaginative consciousness, isn't it? That the consciousness that Vidya ma'am was also talking about. It's like you look inside and you start thinking.
The particular consciousness of a being and becoming of a tribe, which are in a various ways marginalized.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So in a way, it's becoming a voice for the voiceless.
Absolutely.
And so that's it from my part, actually. And thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharnya. But before you go, there is one more question. So it says, when you bring in two kinds of subjectivities from Barth's theorization and from the post-colonial context in Dai, what does this interaction yield?
Okay, so when you bring in two kinds of subjectivities from Barth and
from the post-colonial in Dai, right? What does this interaction yields?
Okay, so are we talking about unidimensional subjectivity, or are we talking about a very polydimensional, multidimensional subjectivity? That, I think, is the first question, because in my mind, Barth's notion of subjectivity, the way he, when he explored in his theory, and that was way back in the 60s. So that was a very unified, unidimensional subjectivity, perhaps very much rooted in the Western episteme. Whereas when we bring it to the post-colonial subjectivity, especially in the context of Dai, we are no longer talking about one kind of subjectivity, and that is true for any kind of post-colonial reading, not just in terms of subjectivity. So this multiplicity of subjectivity, or this multidimensional subjectivity, is really interesting, because Dai as an author, Dai as a representative of her community, and then the narrator, who is very much like Dai but is not Dai, and then we as the readers, there is this constant politics, and this interaction yields, as I think I have answered this question before already, this imaginative consciousness, that how much of it is lost on us, how much of the history is lost on us, and how much of it needs to be explored, because orality necessarily is about multiplicity of identities and multiplicity of voices. So I don't know whether I've answered the question, but yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Sharanya. Now we'll move to our next presenter, Atul. So Atul is a third year BTech student from the Department of Mechanical Engineering at IIT Jodhpur, and he's interested in automobiles. Today he will present the paper on Orality in Mamang Dai's The Legends of Bensam. Over to you, Atul. Atul, you can start your presentation.
Sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Atul Kumar from BTech third year. The title of my paper is Orality in Mamangtai, The Legends of Insam. This paper aims to examine the literary use of oral tradition and its importance in Mamangtai novel, The Legends of Insam. The main plot of the novel is about the character Hoksu, the boy who fell from the sky, and the novel depicts the impact and influence of oral in Adi community through the stories and many other stories linked to it. This paper signifies the orality, and it is illustrated by the story Rights of Love from the novel, and it is supported by Easter sayings which on orality made in the context of Kasi society. Now, India Northeast is home to a diverse range of ethnic tribes with various cultures, languages, and religions. The elders of the tribes also rich oral literature, which is often linked with myth, legends, and cosmogony and the like to the younger generation in the society. Now, during the colonial time in India, documents were written by the Britishers to facilitate in their administrations. Hence, in order to map the origins of a tribe, we need to rely heavily upon the oral traditions. Although none of the tribes had written culture to record their lives and history, their histories can be found in their oral culture. The stories were passed on as a repositories of collective memory from one generation to another generation as a part of tribe's soul culture. In a general sense, oral tradition refers to a collective memory shared through word of mouth, consisting the information and knowledge which helps the community to assert a common identity. Memories in oral tradition play a role of bypass through which one can visit the Dhyama past, and it also acts as a link between the past and the present. Oral histories also provide an unexpected twist in interpreting historical and cultural connections. This paper examines orality, local knowledge, and creative engagement with oral tradition, ranging from folklore to performative traditions, with rituals, in the writing of Muhammad. To discuss the oral tradition in literatures of this region, I have chosen the Adi community and the writings of Muhammad, who herself belongs to this time. And she has first-hand experiences of Adi's customs and rituals. She has been a prominent poetess as well as a novelist, incorporating the oral in most of her writings. Myths, folklore, and rituals of Adi have contributed and shaped many dimensions of our life. Mahmud has made many legends, traditions, rituals, which are part of oral tradition of Adi, into a fictional narrative and in the story of legends of Islam. This fictional work depicts the evolution as well as degradation of Adi from a primitive to a modern society. In her one of interview with the Hindu, she reveals that prime intention behind writing this novel is to protect and preserve the heritage and legacy of these tales. She further states that I was in oral tradition, I was trying to meet people and collect and record these oral narratives, the small history which are getting lost. Mahmudai has emphasized on the significance of oral tradition, orator, and spiritual aspects throughout the novel, The Legend of Ensemble. In one of her stories in the novel, Rights of Love, she tells us about the handing down stories legends from one generation to another, from a mother to a daughter, probably as a part of their tradition. The mother Nana had given a box of stories to her only daughter Lucy with the instructions. Keep this. This is the box of story, and you can save them, color them, and put out anytime. When I'm handed down her child Lucy, a small box with pink gently that smelled sweet, comforting, and had held up with copper-colored binoculars for her to play through. These spoken rituals are passing down and down a box of story points out the importance of oral tradition in the lives of the community. The box contains memories objects such as photographs, binoculars, and others. These visual objects speak of unwritten, undocumented stories, demonstrating their link with orality here. The term binoculars for her to play through in metaphorically reminiscent of reconfiguration of life by the narrative, and the process of composition of storytelling is completed not in the text but in reader and recipient. The binoculars are the social tool of conciliation between the narrator and the audience. Now, it's the same. I also mentioned the importance of morality in her note, morality alive in recapturing the tales. The significance of such a system is the oral preservation of itself within the private union of individual and common domain of the clan or community. This morality-based knowledge system of message has also prevented their people from each conversion into Christianity. In this way, Mr. Sayyid also shows the importance of morality. Mamutari has also used many myths stories related to rain, wood, summer, snakes, birds, and many other natural things which were influencing the life of Adi. In the story, The Boy Who Fell from the Sky, we see how the legend related to a serpent affected the life and death of the Hope's father, Loto. The villagers believed that one who witnessed serpent with one ear named Berwin could die within a year. Unfortunately, Hope's father, Loto, had seen something similar to this serpent, and the villagers were sure that he would die soon. Soon after, while hunting, he was mistakenly killed by his fellow hunter. But the hunter escaped punishment of death and was only exiled in, in a forest for a month. This relaxation could be read in the light of people's belief in the serpent. In this way, we can see how the myths were reflecting the life of the community in the story of Mamunda. Now I'm going to conclude my paper. Mamunda has the oral tradition, oral literature, and memory of Adi in the novel. And by writing about this oral culture, she tries to promote and preserve the creative culture and tradition of her tribe in the face of modernity. The rituals and legends depicted in the novel are either historical or based on folklore. She is acting as a representative of the culture or the informer, which you were writing and presenting the Adi tribe in a reading form to the readers and future generations. In this way, the Iceland novel gave a voice to Adi literature, which had been silenced by the advent of culture and modernization. Thank you very much. Now I am concluding the paper.
Thank you, Atul. So I am hoping you're done with your presentation. Yes, Atul?
I am done with my presentation. If there is any kind of comment, questions, I am ready for it.
Yes.
Okay, Raja.
So there is one question here. What is the role of memories in oral culture?
So, as I have mentioned, the memory oral culture plays a role of and interpret the realm of the past. So, in orality, the root of orality lied in the panel of memory. And through the memory, people construct their stories, and these stories are interpreted to their younger generations. And oral tradition is a collective memory, and it is forward from one generation to another. In this way, oral memories are interpreted in oral culture. Next.
Okay, so there is another question. How Mamangdai is protecting and preserving the culture of Adi community?
So, Mamata has collected the oral literature of Adi community and saved them as different novels like The Legend of Insam and The Black Hill and many others. She has written the myths, rituals, customs of Adi community, and her fiction work gave a voice to Adi oral literature. In this way, we can see she is trying to promote and preserve the Vedic culture of her tribe.
Okay, Atul. So there is one more question. How the tradition of giving a box of stories is concerned with orality, or how it is related with orality?
So, I can say, handing down the thoughts from one generation to another, it's a sharing of memories filled in the photographs which are in the box of the story. Like the box of storage is not the box of storage; it is a metaphor used. The box contains photographs which have their own story, own memory, and these memories are related with oral culture. These memories objects speak the unwritten, undocumented stories which were uh, which were engaged in the box of story. So in this way, we can see how the box of story is related with morality.
Okay, thank you so much, Atul.
Yeah, thank you, Sukhdeep.
Now I'll call our next presenter. He is Mahendra Singh Chaudhary. He's a third year BTech student from the Department of CS and Engineering at IIT Jodhpur. His hobbies include playing cricket. And now he will present a paper on orality in Khasi community with
अर्धा
reference
खाना
to
खा लेते
Esther Sanyam.
मणिपुरी स्टाइल में
So over to you, Mahendra.
I can cook everything. I mean, curry pakodi se vada se
Hello,
methi
am I audible?
malai. Not east to
Yes, yes, you're
Hello,
audible.
am I audible? Thank you,
Yes,
Supreet.
no.
So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am Mahendra Singh Chaudhary, and I'll be presenting my paper titled "Orality in Khasi Society" with reference to Esther Sayam. Uh, this paper attempts to evaluate the importance of orality in the context of the Khasi society of Meghalaya. Here, I use Esther Sayam to illustrate my point. Taking examples from her novel Memoir in Water, speaks the Wah Unkra and analyzing them. The paper is broadly divided into three chapters: introduction, discussion, and conclusion. In the first chapter, I begin by defining orality, what it means, and what it signifies in the context of the Khasi society. This is followed by a discussion on the simple Khasi habit of chewing kwai or a pan or a betel nut, and talk about the context of this habit by looking into the story of how it comes into being. India's northeast is a land of contrasts. Generation after generation, the inhabitants of this territory have shared its modern as well as ancient history and culture through legends, myths, stories, poetry, dances, arts, and crafts. This paper focuses on the tradition of orality engulfed in the region, primarily looking at the Khasi society. This region is exceptionally rich in oral literature, as the vocation of written literature is comparatively new. Rather, its people are less familiar with writing as a form of transfer of knowledge. Stories and folktales, songs and poems, myths and legends, most of the things that connect people to their roots, and the ways to understand the uniqueness and diversities of their culture, customs, and social practices are found only in the oral literature. Simultaneously, according to Esther Sayyam, very less of it is being in the written form, which is mainstream in the other regions of the country as well as in the world. Hence, To properly understand the rich and diverse communities and people of this glorious land, and to attempt to link the people to their culture, diving into the oral literature is indispensable for one to truly understand the culture, tradition, history, and harmony among the stakeholders of this region of great diversity. This literary analysis of Memoir in Water speaks the Wah Umsha by Esther Sayam is an attempt to do that. This novel is an attempt by Esther Sayam to illustrate the life experiences of the Khasi people from the perspective of the river Unkra. To discuss the prevalence of orality as a form of literature in India's northeast, I have chosen the Khasi Society of Meghalaya. The Khasi Society has a rich and diverse history, being one of the very few matrilinear, rather matriarchal, as some scholars have argued, societies in the world. Whatever be the theories of scholars and social scientists, the account of the origin of the Khasis is incomplete without the oral accounts transferred from generation to generation over the course of the existence of this vibrant and unique culture. As Esther Sayam correctly points out, the richness of all folk traditions can be correctly explained only by considering the fact that they are embedded deeply within the community's psyche by the word of mouth. To understand simple characteristics of society, like the habit of chewing kwai, we need to look into the stories and tales that are only available in the oral literature. Although it is essentially just a pan served with a generous dose of areca nut, betel leaf, and lime, it is loved by one and all in Meghalaya, and it is believed that even in heaven people eat kwai, which is also a popular saying in Meghalaya. While talking about this habit of eating kwai, which is even seen in the urban Khasis who are losing touch with the ancient culture, she says it is the oral tradition and the word of mouth that keeps them knowledgeable of this system. She goes on to quote T.B. Shubha and Sujit Som. uh, it appears to be an innocent activity, but Khasi oral tradition has a story, known to one and all, that justifies the custom. She also quotes Bevan elsewhere, who in his book Ka Mationg Ki Khanatong compares the distinctive audible presence of the Khasis to the thumping of ethnic heartbeat and uses the stronger term kinde instead of the commonly used tide to describe its pulsations, pointing to a heightened sensitivity embedded deep within the community's psyche. He cites an example from the tale of Likai while talking about fear and jealousy, the foremost emotions that threaten to ruin the marriage, by telling the story of a woman who commits suicide after she discovers that her child's stepfather has fed her the flesh of her own daughter. In popular culture and among folk beliefs of the Khasi society, many people believe that this tale of Noki Likai is linked with oral tradition of the Khasis. The mention of the term kwai as an eating habit in this collection novel is in chapter 8 that tells the story of Da Simper, the skinny one. She is described as indulging in this habit, and she is the Da Simper who sent showers of tobacco laced spit everywhere when she spoke. The link between orality and this habit has already been found in the Khasi popular culture. Here, an oral act, the Dur's act of speaking, is humorously linked to this habit of kwai eating. Also, this habit is not uncommon in this community and often part of the everyday lives of the Khasis, irrespective of their age or gender. This chapter shows this few lines later when Dur's habit of quiet eating is also a habit common among some of her sons, who formed an early habit of eating too much quiet and drinking too much tear. This gives a sense that quiet eating is an everyday habit among this community. In this story, there is also a mention of quiet eating as a habit for the main character, the woman, as she finds her child's fingers in the betel nut or kwai basket. To conclude the paper, I would like to take help of a popular saying, which goes as, there was a time when God called together the people of the world in order to give them a written manuscript, a written script of their own. And when faced with a river swollen with rain, the Khasi swallowed his written script, and hence the Khasis have never had a written manuscript of their own and had to rely upon the spoken word. The novel Memoir in Water Speaks the Wah and Shah by Esther Sayam is an apt illustration of orality being embedded in the Khasi culture, illustrated through their habit of quiet eating. It shows how the river is telling the stories of the people to the people is an obvious demonstration of orality intertwined in the Khasi culture, and the quiet eating habit becomes the connecting link. The stories and tales bring in the cultures, traditions, human concerns, and relationships and their fragility to focus. Keep the oral component of the literature aside, and we will have near zero knowledge about the Khasi and their society, rather, the whole territory of the Northeast India. To this, I conclude my paper uh, and open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Mahendra, for such a wonderful presentation. So there are a few questions for you. Can you elaborate more on how a memoir in water is a suitable illustration for orality?
Memoir in Water is a story about how a river is uh, talking about experiences of people from its own perspective. It's a unique tale of personification of a river, and how the story is being circulated in the masses is through the oral literature only, by stories and folk tales, and not through any written scriptures.
Thank you, Mahendra. There's another question. How is orality linked with Khasi society?
Orality has been deeply embedded in the Khasi society, in its culture, in its like people, and in its customs and society as a whole. Uh, for example, this habit of quiet eating, it is seen in children from seen from children to old people, all alike, and offering someone a quiet is considered a gesture of friendship and togetherness and harmony. So like, it is with the oral literature only that they have been able to put so much focus on simple gestures like eating a koi.
Okay, Mahendra. There is a one more question. How do you link the story Nauki Likhai with the habit of kawaii eating?
Uh, so Noki Likai is a story about a woman whose daughter has been fed to her by the daughter's stepfather, and after she realizes that she she kills herself. So there has been a mention of quiet eating in this. This is a very famous story in the Meghalayan region, and specifically the Khasi tribes. And the mention of the habit of quiet eating has been profoundly seen in the story No Kilikai. So that is how I have tried to link the story with the habit of quiet eating.
All right. Thank you so much, Mahendra.
Thank you for
So there
giving me
are
the
no
chance.
more questions. And with that, I'll move to the next presenter. So our last presenter today is Rajat. He's a third-year BTech student from the Department of Bioscience and Bioengineering at IIT Jodhpur. His specialization is bioengineering. And today he will present on oral tradition in Mamangdai's the Legend of Pensam. Over to you, Rajat. Rajat, I hope you heard me and
Yes, ma'am. Hello. Am I audible?
yes, Rajat, you're audible.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, Rajat, you're audible, and also we can see your
Thank
screen.
Yeah, Rajat is Rajat is last, right? इसके बाद thank you करेंगे हम. But what a day! Is there anything on the YouTube and Facebook?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Ravi Venturkar. My top,
YouTube
I'm
is working fine because
my
I'm not
topic is
touching any
orality in the legends of
notification.
Pensam. Uh,
ये किसी ने एक अच्छा कमेंट किया
so
था. Somebody
in this
outside.
paper, I'm going to analyze Mamang Dai's The Legends of Pensam. In this novel, Dai provides an overview of the Adi community of Arunachal Pradesh through a web of oral stories from the community. I will look at those parts of the novel where the narrator mentions about folktales and folklore of the Adis. Close reading method was used for analysis
But
in
I
this
really
text.
liked it. I mean, none
In
of you
oral
had proper
tradition,
literature background, okay, and still you were able
the
to come
knowledge and the
out
culture
with,
of communities
many
storytelling.
interesting things.
Mamang Dai's The Legends of Pensam
And
is such a
yeah,
text which
your exam
contributes
is
in this
round the corner and
tradition.
you are
Dai is a
okay.
poet, novelist, and freelance
I'm
reporter.
ready.
She has worked as
And the
correspondent
other
for
one, the
various
mood
dailies
swing
like
also.
Sentinel, The Telegraph, and
Thanks for
Hindustan Times.
tolerating
She
me.
was the project officer in the
Because
City
she
Hospital's
has sent her
conservation program
presentation,
of the
and I don't
WWF
know
in
why I
Arunachal
thought she
Pradesh.
just sent a
Dai
PPT
has
or something
also
or
conferred the
sent a
Padma
video
Shri in
or something. Yesterday I
2011
was
for education,
angry.
has also been associated with the Arunachal Pradesh
So,
Literary Society,
and you must be
Sahitya
shocked.
and
What is
Sangeet
ma'am saying?
Natak Academy, Raja Ram Mohan Roy Library Foundation, and the
No, but you
Northeast
have sent the
Writers
recording.
Forum in various capacities.
Why?
However, Dai is principally known as creative writer and a historian who writes about Arunachal
And then
Pradesh.
even
A
Mahinder also, I
one-time
said
civil
before is
servant,
the
she
same
quit
thing.
her job to devote herself to writing. She is
So
the author
दोनों
of
को पढ़ी
Arunachal
में
Pradesh, The
same
Hidden Land,
thing.
documentation of the culture and tradition of state
Okay,
about
we
which
should
not
listen to
much
him.
is
Okay, please
known,
last
and
presentation.
mountains
Okay.
harvest the food of Arunachal
Yeah,
Pradesh.
and
Her creative
ask
writing includes
something.
two
Hey,
novels, The Legends of Pensam and The Stupid Cupid, two volumes of poetry titled The River Poems and El Bellissimo del Tiempo, and two illustrated books of folktales for children titled Sky Queen and Once Upon a Moon Time. Dai talks to herself as an Itanagar based writer. Dai's The Legends of Pensam talks about Arunachal Pradesh from the perspective of its original inhabitants, the tribal populace, which is Adi tribe. Pensam refers to tales of daughter returning to her roots, tales of tribes and their values and religions, tales of British who arrive in this secret country long before India's independence, and tales of the area's daughter who felt a sense of belonging to the region while welcoming the change that was to come. Even the creator of the world has a tale to tell. According to the Adi tribe, there was only Keom in the beginning, which means nothingness. Adi is a common term denoting the hillman, and it includes a number of groups. It may be applied to all the hill tribes around the Brahmaputra Valley. The Adi are concentrated in the east and west Siang district of Arunachal Pradesh. Mamangda uses the ancient myths and rich tribal folklore in a framework of past historical events and contemporary reality to express both the commonplace and mystic in nature and life. A description of the surroundings, the relationships, and the lives of people is lyrical and draws the reader into the story. Alive from the times of its origin through the appearance of the colonizers to the present day, which is understandable by people easily because of its language. They can spread the title of the fourth section and the stories within them are in lowercase. The conscious stylistic differentiation is probably meant to foreground the movement away from universality and towards interlegitimacy and fluidity as suggested in the word pensum. Instead of single protagonist around whom the story of novel usually revolves, the focus here is on entire community, the Adis. The shift of focus from individual to community is also part of the same attempt to put text in an in-between space away from the main plot, which are the standard interpretive approaches of narrative fiction. In the absence of overarch, there are series of stories that are disparate yet interconnected. So, at Ananya Hildori cites Michel de Certeau, who is in the practice of popular culture and ordinary language. She also highlights the fact that Certeau focuses on how popular culture, folktales, or serious services by subverting the established order of society. In Certeau's interpretation, as Hildori says, the story is observes become a powerful social and cultural medium. Ilodori links this search with Dai's novel and Shinian that recorded or official historiography operate the strategies of instituted powers, where as the fabulous stories or folktales offer some tactics of counter narrative or resistance to their audience of monoculture or other authors. Sarchu says that the stylistic effects of the folktales devices and figures to the established order. He calls the folktales the living museum of the whole. The folktales myths or popular culture can be termed as practice of an ordinary art form, the effect of which is large on the minds of the people. Sachi discusses how the ordinary man or everyman turns into a teller of significant tales. He says, rather than being merely represented in it, the ordinary man act out the text itself, in and by the text, and in addition, he makes plausible the universal character of the particular place in which the mad discourse of the knowing wisdom is pronounced. So my conclusion is that the Mamangdai depicts a diverse socio-cultural world in the legends of Pensam, which is held together by the essential folklore, which is transmitted orally. In these stories, the folklore of Hoxo is that he is the child who fell from the sky. The significance of this lore must be understood in the light of the Adi tribe's creation myths. The interpretation of folklore should not be focused on the simplistic reading of the narratives, but rather than on the contextualization of folklore in behavioral and social context. The Adi tribe's mythical and magical creation myths are reveal sociality that is profoundly rooted in ecological consciousness. Thanks, ma'am.
Thank you, Rajat. So, as Rajat was the
Sorry.
last presenter, I would like to open the floor of question and discussions. So, all of you, you may ask questions based on his presentation or any other presentations. So, Rajat, there are a few questions for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, what is the connection between DCATU and DI? I'm sorry for little wrong pronunciation here.
Research and Daito. So research talk about the popular culture of folklores which affect the uh, political and minds of some of the people, which can establish some type of uh, some type of political disclosure of the things that can happen.
All right, Rajat. So few more questions are there. How did the oral tradition is expressed in her stories?
The oral tradition of the oral tradition expressed in the terms of the story shamans and the ancestor to the who is not there, but they know about their culture because of the stories that told by the ancestors. That is how the oral tradition is expressed in our stories.
All right. There is a one more question. Please clarify the point. The absence of an overreaching narrative focusing on the protagonist is also noticeable. Instead, there are series of stories that are disparate yet interconnected.
Because the legends of Pensab is about the whole community, about the Adi community. It is not about the only the author. It is there is no more amusing or twist and turns in the stories. The its overarching narrative is not there, and there is lots of stories which have their interconnection in between them. That is how this point is.
All right, Rajat. So, with this, I welcome any comments or any questions. So, anybody, if you have anything, you can ask. All right. So as we are moving towards the end of our webinar, I would like to call Dr. Natasha Thordam here. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Supreet. So yeah, we have reached towards the end of this webinar, and yeah, I'm here to deliver the vote of thanks. So I begin by thanking the director of IIT Jodhpur and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Jodhpur for giving us this institutional space and also allowing us to have this webinar in the virtual space. And I also thank Dr. Vidya Sarveshwaran for her stimulating keynote address. And I also thank the student presenters, students of my course, for organizing this, webinar. Yeah. And and yeah, at the end, I'd like to end this, this webinar with a such certain thoughts on how we were all in this very troubled time of the pandemic. We all have come together to make a difference, to sort of spread a spirit of hope in this time of despair. And so, yeah, there is always a feeling of happiness, when we try to make a difference, or when we are making a difference. And I want to thank my dear students for for their attentions, and for allowing me to make a difference in their life, and vice versa, they making a difference in my life, and to the audiences too. And I hope that with an event such as this, in such an uncertain time, we are able to make a difference. And on this note, I officially end the webinar uh, organized by the students of the course Introduction to Literatures from India's Northeast. Thank you very much for watching us. Have a nice day.